With the high leg kick and smooth delivery synonymous with the golden age of Baltimore Orioles baseball, Jim Palmer pitched 19 seasons in the major leagues, all in the orange and black. During this time, the Hall of Famer collected 3 Cy Young Awards and 3 World Series titles. To this day, his cerebral color commentary is enjoyed by fans on the Mid-Atlantic Sports Network. Today we salute the one-of-a-kind origin story, glory days, and legacy of Jim Palmer. Jim Palmer was born in New York City on October 15, 1945. At just 2 days old, he was adopted by the affluent Moe and Polly Wisen. Moe was a successful executive in the garment industry, and Polly owned a dress shop. If you're familiar with Palmer, you're already finding the irony in his family's garment industry ties, given he's the most famous underwear model in sports and possibly otherwise. His deal with Jockey spanned his career and beyond, spawning a handful of television commercials and countless magazine ads. Great authors go on book tours. Jim Palmer signs your actual mom's ass in the mall. Jim grew up in a lavish estate on New York's Park Avenue until the age of 9 when Moe passed away. Polly, Jim, and his sister Bonnie, who was also adopted, moved to Beverly Hills, California, where Polly met and subsequently married an actor named Max Palmer, who eventually adopted Jim and Bonnie. Fun fact, there were actually 2 actors in Hollywood at that time named Max Palmer. One was an 8'2" professional wrestler who starred as the Monster in several B-movies and horror flicks. The other generally played a detective type on law enforcement shows such as Dragnet and Highway Patrol. Detective Max is Jim's stepdad, not the Ape Man. The family would move again to Scottsdale, Arizona, where Jim would become a 3-sport star in high school, playing baseball, football, and basketball. Jim actually led the entire state of Arizona in scoring in basketball his senior season. He received basketball offers from UCLA and Stanford. Undecided but favoring baseball, he played for a summer league team out of Winter, South Dakota, where he caught the eye of then Orioles farm system director Harry Dalton. Unbeknownst to Dalton and the Orioles, Palmer was in a serious car wreck on the way back to Arizona, somewhere on I-80, let's say it was in Brule. The car, which did not have seat belts, was driven by a friend of Palmer's who was asleep at the wheel, resulting in the car exiting the highway, flipping several times, and settling in a ditch. Surprisingly, both passengers walked away, though Jim did have a sore left knee that would eventually require surgery. Palmer would sign with the Orioles for $50,000 just a few days later, and then it was back to South Dakota to the Orioles' Single-A Northern League affiliate in Aberdeen. The club was managed by Cal Ripken Sr., and it featured future greats Mark Belanger and Lou Piniella. Aberdeen won the league pennant, and Jim Palmer went 11-3, including a June no-hitter. Jim bypassed 2 levels and joined the big league club for spring training in 1965, ultimately making the team in the role of an emergency starter and an all-purpose bullpen mop-up guy. He made the starting rotation in 1966 and led the AL pennant-winning Birds in wins. This would set him up for his legendary World Series Game 2 shutout opposite Sandy Koufax in the final appearance of his career. The legend of Cakes was born, a moniker given to Palmer based on his ritual of eating a big stack of pancakes every day he got the start. You didn't escape a classic Orioles roster without a great nickname. Just ask Crazy Horse, Steady Eddie, Full Pack, The Judge, and the Human Vacuum Cleaner. 1967 saw Jim Palmer struggle with arm and back soreness, losing his effectiveness and spending a large chunk of the season in the minors. Injury issues persisted in 1968, and it's worth mentioning, while Jim was away ironing things out in AAA Rochester, the Orioles promoted a new skipper, the legendary Earl Weaver. It's well documented that Jim and Earl were constantly at each other's throats, fighting like an old married couple. It's easy to see why they may not have seen eye to eye, Jim standing at 6'3", Earl standing at 5 foot, not very many. Jim was handsome, talented, and calculated. Earl was just Earl. My favorite adjective for him is simply pissed. To quote Jim, the only thing Earl knows about big league pitching is that he couldn't hit it, a reference to Earl's failed career in the minors. This back and forth would go on for the rest of their lives. It would be brought up in both of their respective Hall of Fame speeches, and would even emerge on the occasional national broadcast they'd appear on together. There was deep, albeit complicated endearment there. This is the point in the story where Jim Palmer really hits his stride and defines his career. And here to deep dive is my friend Cam. Take it away.
I want to start off by saying that I'm very excited to be a part of this video. It's truly an honor having the opportunity to work with another O's fan on YouTube about some of the all-time great players. My name is Cam, and on my channel Cam23, we talked about Brooks and Frank Robinson, and today, we get to discuss Jim Palmer, the story, the icon, and the prime that would cement him as one of the best to ever do it. Having spent the entire 1968 season in the minor leagues, Palmer needed to establish himself and earn a regular spot in the rotation. In 1966, he was a rotation regular, but didn't put up numbers strong enough to get him above league average in terms of ERA+. 1969 was Jim Palmer's breakout season at the big league level. In 26 games and 181 innings pitched, he would post a 2.34 ERA. He won 16 games and led the league in win percentage. Palmer followed up his breakout campaign with a year in which he finished 5th in Cy Young voting and made his first All-Star team. He led the league in shutouts and innings pitched with a staggering 305. In 1970, Palmer became a 20-game winner for the first time in his career. But as you'll soon learn, this is by no means the first time that he would accomplish this feat. Jim Palmer would continue to get better and better as the years progressed. Jim Palmer made the All-Star team the following 2 seasons and would finish 5th in Cy Young once again in 1972. The 2.07 ERA he had in 1972 would be the lowest he posted in his career. In 1973, Jim Palmer took the best parts of his game and put it into one amazing season. He led the league with a 2.40 ERA, won 22 games, his 4th straight season to win 20 or more. Palmer would be crowned as the Cy Young winner for the first time in his career, and he finished 2nd in MVP, finishing behind Reggie Jackson, who led the league in 5 major offensive categories. Palmer was on top of his game after his otherworldly 1973 season. But unfortunately for Palmer, 1974 would bring to pass a what goes up must come down notion. His arm started to give him trouble during spring training leading up to the 1974 regular season, and he would miss 8 weeks with elbow problems. He still was above league average, but that wasn't the expectation for a reigning Cy Young winner. The best players in the game are able to overcome adversity, and Jim Palmer was no exception. 1975 saw him not only return to form, but come back stronger and better than ever. Jim Palmer returned to his winning ways and posted 23 wins, which became the most in a single season for his career. He posted a 2.09 ERA and threw 10 shutouts, both of which led the league. He would win the Cy Young and finished 6th in MVP voting. This time around, Palmer was able to defend his title and won the Cy Young in back-to-back seasons. In Cy Young voting, he beat out Mark Fidrych, a one-hit wonder for sure, who was a very quirky guy, but had an insane amount of talent. He led the league in ERA and complete games, but Jim Palmer threw 65 more innings, which in my book is important. The dominance was arguably more for Fidrych, but it came in a much smaller sample size. Jim Palmer faced the most batters of anyone this year. Palmer this season led the league in games started, innings pitched, and wins. His ERA was excellent as well, at a 2.51 mark. 1976 was the start of a couple of streaks for Palmer. He led the league in innings 3 years in a row and would win 4 Gold Gloves in a row.
Wow.
1977 and 1978 saw Palmer finish 2nd and 3rd in Cy Young voting respectively. He won 20 games or more in both seasons, with 1978 being the 8th and final year he would accomplish this feat. Palmer's value to the Orioles is hard to fathom. While wins are primarily a team stat, it's still incredible to me that Jim Palmer won 20 or more games in 8 seasons throughout his career. And if it wasn't for 1974, it would have been consecutive. While we're on the topic of winning 20 games, it's also worth noting that Jim Palmer was a part of the 1971 Orioles rotation that had 4 20-game winners, becoming just the 2nd team to accomplish this feat. While 1978 may have been the unofficial end to Jim Palmer's prime, 3 years later in 1982 was his last hurrah. He would put together a season in which he finished 2nd in Cy Young voting. Palmer for his career had a lot of success in October baseball, going 8-3 with a 2.61 ERA in 17 games, 15 of which were starts. He would throw a complete game shutout in the 1966 World Series against the juggernaut LA Dodgers, and again years later in the 1973 ALCS against the Oakland Athletics. Palmer was a part of all 6 Orioles teams to go to the World Series in franchise history. Fun fact, he is the only pitcher in the history of baseball to earn a win in a World Series game in 3 different decades. During his prime from 1969 to 1978, Palmer compiled a 2.52 ERA, tossed 179 complete games, with 50 of those being shutouts. He tossed an average of 277 innings a year. You'll be hard-pressed to find a track record on par with Jim Palmer's prime. The level of consistency that he showcased is nothing short of incredible, and in this video, I'm glad that Hat Billy and I were able to celebrate an all-time great Oriole. With that being said, I'll pass the baton back to Hat Billy. Later.
The next few seasons saw Palmer fail to hit a stride as he had so many times before, mainly due to re-emerging soreness and tightness in his arm, despite the 79 and 80 Orioles both being among the most successful teams in franchise history. The 81 season was, of course, strike-shortened, and once again Jim couldn't gain much momentum. Early in 1982, Palmer was again ineffective, and GM Hank Peters announced that Palmer no longer belonged in the starting rotation and was relegated to the bullpen. Despite their differences, Earl Weaver boisterously disagreed in defense of Palmer, and Weaver called it, stating that once Palmer returned to the rotation, he'd return to form. Shades of a decade prior, Palmer went 13-1 with a 2.24 ERA the rest of the season. Good enough to even out the stats from his shaky start and land the 36-year-old in second place in AL Cy Young voting. Weaver stepped away after this season. In '83, Palmer spent a majority of the pennant race and playoffs on the disabled list but pitched an inspired Game 3 of the World Series. After just 5 appearances, Jim Palmer was released by the Orioles in May of 1984. He speculated that he'd likely receive offers from other teams, but opted not to pursue them. He attempted a comeback in 1991 under manager Frank Robinson, joining the team for spring training, but was forced to call it off after a hamstring injury. Shout out to Trust Your Stuff for having a clutch VHS rip of this performance. With a foot in the door at ABC Sports, where he'd already provided color commentary as a player as early as the 1981 World Series, Jim dedicated himself to the broadcast booth, and he was a part of many of baseball's biggest moments until ABC lost its national baseball contract in 1989. This season he began as an announcer for the Orioles and never looked back, celebrating his 33rd season in the booth in Baltimore this season. Jim has authored a few books, his first simply titled Pitching. A ballsy move in my opinion to just title it Pitching. The follow-up was an exercise book called Jim Palmer's Way to Fitness, which saw him continue to don his trusty jockey underwear, and in 1996 he released a memoir called Together We Were 11'9", a salute to his one-of-a-kind relationship with Earl Weaver. Jim's number 22 was retired by the Orioles, and he was inducted into their Hall of Fame in 1986, and the Baseball Hall of Fame followed in 1990. A sharp baseball mind, Palmer is known to take time during broadcasts to address kids at home trying to learn the game, simplifying many advanced aspects of baseball to those who are new to it. It was in his nature to quote-unquote grow the game far before this phrase became hackneyed in the modern baseball lexicon. We salute you, Cakes. Take it easy.